the 8th of December, a new home for God's people, the story of Joshua. After God saved his people from slavery, he took them on a long journey through the desert. How long, you ask? Well, I'm not exactly sure how many miles it was, but the journey took them 40 years. 40 years! That's older than you for sure. It might even be older than your mum and dad. Now, if you think that 40 years sounds like a long time in the desert, just think how God's people felt. They were really tired, like how you probably feel after being out all day walking or climbing a mountain, but times 100. They were really looking forward to settling into their new home that God had promised he would bring them to. But they were also afraid, because one of the first places God told them to go to in the land was Jericho, a massive city with walls so high it looked like they reached right up into the sky. How would they ever get into it? God's people, the Israelites, asked their new leader Joshua what to do. Joshua had taken over after Moses died, and he seemed to know a lot about battles. If anyone knew how to knock down big walls, Joshua did. But God told Joshua that he had a plan. It wasn't the plan that Joshua expected, but then again, God often does things we don't expect. The most important part of the plan was for Joshua and God's people to be strong and courageous. They needed to believe that God, who they couldn't see, was stronger than the walls of Jericho, which they definitely could see. This was how God's plan worked. Early one morning, Joshua's army put on their armour, took out their swords, and together they went marching around the city. Not one day, not 2 days, not even 3 days, but 7 days. On the 7th day, God told his people to march around the city 7 times. Then God told everyone to blow their trumpets and shout as loud as they could. Sure enough, right after they shouted, the walls of Jericho began to shake. Then they began to crack. Then they collapsed into rubble. The strong walls of Jericho weren't strong anymore. They weren't even walls anymore. This was just one battle that God had won for his people. You see, God was with Joshua and his people. Even when it was hard, even when Jericho was scary, and it seemed strange what God was asking them to do, God was with them. Years later, when Joshua was very old, he reminded the Israelites of everything God had done. God has been strong for you, Joshua said. Keep trusting him and following him. Sadly, the people said they'd keep trusting and following God, but it was just like before. They started to think that they could make their lives better without God and put themselves first. They didn't realise that even though they stopped being faithful to God, God would always be faithful to them. One day, God would come back to stay.